The bitter autumn wind whipped across the dusty streets of Idaho City, Idaho, carrying with it the scent of impending winter and Mary Jameson's desperation. She clutched the letter in her trembling hands, the paper worn from countless readings, her sister's plea for help weighing heavier than the darkening clouds above. Emma's consumption had worsened, and without proper medicine, Mary couldn't afford she wouldn't survive the winter. Mary stood outside the weathered building with its freshly painted sign, Prescott's Mercantile and Loans. Her stomach knotted as she watched patrons exit with parcels and supplies. The stories about Augustus Prescott's ruthless business practices haunted her thoughts, but Emma's hollow cough echoed louder in her memory. 23 years old and alone in the world except for her younger sister, Mary squared her shoulders and pushed through the heavy oak door. Inside, the Mercantile bustled with afternoon trade. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stocked with everything from preserved foods to tools, fabrics to ammunition. At the far end, behind a polished counter, stood Augustus Prescott, a balding man in his 50s with small, calculating eyes and a waistcoat that strained against his substantial girth. "Miss Jameson," he acknowledged with a nod that didn't reach his eyes. "What brings you to my establishment today?" "Another letter to post," Mary swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the brim of her worn hat. "No, Mr. Prescott, I've come about a loan." The merchant's eyebrows rose, and a smile that resembled a wolf eyeing wounded prey spread across his face. "A loan? That's quite unusual for a woman in your position. Please, step into my office." The back room was dimly lit and cluttered with ledgers. Mary perched on the edge of a chair as Prescott settled his bulk behind a desk. "My sister needs medicine from San Francisco," Mary explained, her voice steadier than she felt. "The consumption's gotten worse, and Dr. Miller says without proper treatment she won't." Yes, Prescott waved a dismissive hand. "The telegram arrived from the doctor yesterday. Quite expensive, this medicine." His pen scratched figures onto paper. $200 by my calculation." Mary's heart sank. It might as well have been 2,000. "I can pay it back," she insisted. "I've taken on extra laundry and Mrs. Hollister has offered me additional—" "Come now, Miss Jameson," Prescott interrupted, folding his hands over his ample stomach. "We both know laundry and mending won't cover this debt in any reasonable time frame, especially with winter approaching. Your sister might be gone before you pay half." The blunt assessment struck Mary like a physical blow. "There must be something," she whispered. Prescott's gaze traveled over her, lingering on her face and figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "There is one possibility," he said slowly. "I have need of assistance in my household. My wife has returned east to care for her ailing mother. The position would include room and board and would considerably reduce your debt." "You mean work as your housekeeper?" "Among other duties," Prescott replied, his meaning unmistakable in his lingering gaze. 3 months' service would clear your debt completely. I'll even send for the medicine today." Mary's breath caught in her throat. The implication was clear: this was no ordinary employment offer. But Emma's face, gaunt and gray, flashed before her eyes. Her sister was only 19, with her whole life ahead of her if she could just survive this illness. "I would need to see a contract," Mary said carefully, "and confirmation the medicine has been ordered." Prescott's smile widened as he pulled a pre-written document from his desk drawer. "I had a feeling we might reach an arrangement today." Mary read the document with growing horror. The terms were explicit: she would be bound to Prescott for 3 months, living in his home, subject to his complete authority and discretion. The only mercy was a clause stating she could visit her sister once weekly. "You've had this prepared," she accused, looking up with narrowed eyes. "I'm a businessman, Miss Jameson. I anticipate opportunities." He pushed the paper toward her. "Your sister's life for 3 months of service. Quite generous, I'd say." Mary's hand shook as she picked up the pen. Each stroke of her signature felt like another bar in the cage that would soon confine her, but Emma's life was worth any sacrifice. "The medicine will be on tomorrow's stage," Prescott said, satisfaction evident in his voice as he blotted and folded the contract. "You'll move your things to my residence this evening." The bell above the mercantile door jangled as Mary exited, contracts signed, and her freedom traded away. The streets of Idaho City seemed different now, the familiar buildings suddenly foreign, the passers-by oblivious to the invisible chains she now wore. She didn't notice the tall figure watching from across the street, didn't see the way his eyes narrowed as they followed her hurried steps toward home. Ethan Abernathy, newly arrived in Idaho City, had witnessed enough of the exchange through the mercantile's window to recognize predation when he saw it. The set of the woman's shoulders told him everything he needed to know about the nature of whatever agreement had just been reached. Ethan adjusted his hat against the late afternoon sun and continued his scrutiny of the town. After 6 months on the cattle drive from Texas, Idaho City was meant to be just another stop, somewhere to rest before continuing to his brother's ranch in Montana Territory. But something about the red-haired woman's obvious distress stirred his conscience in a way he found difficult to ignore. Mary rushed home to the small cabin she shared with Emma on the outskirts of town. The dwelling was humble but meticulously maintained, the product of two sisters determined to create a home after their parents' deaths 3 years prior. Inside, Emma lay propped against pillows, her breathing labored even in sleep, cheeks flushed with fever against pallid skin. Mary called softly, setting down her basket. "I've got news." Emma's eyes fluttered open, revealing the same deep blue that Mary saw in her own reflection. "Mary, what is it? You look upset." Mary forced a smile, settling on the edge of the narrow bed. "The medicine's coming tomorrow, Doctor. Miller's special order from San Francisco." "But how?" Emma struggled to sit up, confusion clear on her face. "We don't have that kind of money." "I've taken a position," Mary answered, the half-truth bitter on her tongue, "with Mr. Prescott. The pay is very good." Emma's brow furrowed. "Everyone says he's not to be trusted." "Mary, what kind of position?" "Just housekeeping," Mary lied, busying herself with straightening the blankets. "His wife's gone east. It's nothing to worry about. I start tonight, but I'll visit you as often as I'm allowed." She squeezed Emma's thin hand. "Mrs. Hollister will look in on you, and Dr. Miller promised to check daily once the medicine arrives." "Tonight?" Emma's voice rose with alarm. "That's so sudden." "It's a good opportunity," Mary insisted, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Now rest while I pack a few things." As Mary gathered her meager belongings, her movements were mechanical, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what she'd agreed to. 3 months. Surely she could endure anything for 3 months if it meant saving Emma. Outside the cabin window, the sun sank toward the mountains, casting long shadows that matched the darkness settling over Mary's heart. Across town, Ethan Abernathy secured a room at the Idaho House Hotel and made his way to the saloon. The prospector's dream was typical of frontier establishments: a long bar, scattered tables, and the persistent smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. He ordered a drink and found a corner table where he could observe the room while remaining relatively unnoticed. New in town. The bartender, a barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache, delivered Ethan's whiskey. "Just passing through," Ethan replied, sliding a coin across the worn wood. "On my way to Montana." "Cattle business?" the bartender asked, noting Ethan's trail-worn clothing and the calluses on his hands. "Used to be. My brother's got a spread north of Helena. Thought I'd try my hand at something more settled." The bartender nodded approvingly. "Idaho City's seen better days since the gold rush petered out, but it's still a decent place. Most folks here are good people." He hesitated, then added, "Though like anywhere, we've got our share of vultures." "That's so." Ethan kept his tone casual. "Any particular vultures I should watch out for? Depends on what you're involved in." The bartender's gaze sharpened. "But if you're asking who runs this town, that'd be Augustus Prescott. Owns the Mercantile, the freight company, and holds notes on half the businesses and properties hereabouts." "Including yours," Ethan ventured. The bartender's grimace was answer enough. "Let's just say Prescott's got a way of turning other people's hardships into his gain. Man never met a misfortune he couldn't profit from." He glanced over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "Word is he's particularly interested in collecting debts from women whose husbands don't return from prospecting, or who find themselves otherwise alone." Ethan's grip tightened on his glass. The red-haired woman from the Mercantile came to mind. "Sounds like the law might have something to say about that." A humorless laugh escaped the bartender. "Sheriff Taylor's deep in Prescott's pocket. As long as there's nothing too obvious, the law looks the other way." He straightened as another patron approached the bar. "Enjoy your stay in Idaho City, mister. However brief." Left alone, Ethan sipped his whiskey and considered his options. His original plan had been to stay only a day or two before continuing north, but something about the woman's situation nagged at him. It wasn't his business, he told himself. He had his own troubles, his own future to secure. Getting involved in local matters was a fool's errand. And yet, as twilight deepened into night, Ethan found himself watching the door to Prescott's residence from across the street, observing as the red-haired woman arrived with a small carpet bag, her posture rigid with what could only be dread. Something in her determined stride reminded him of his own mother, who had fought to keep their Texas ranch after his father's death, fending off men like Prescott until her dying day. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost rimming the window panes of the modest room where Mary had spent a sleepless night. Prescott's residence was grander than most in Idaho City, a 2-story clapboard house with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch. Her room, if it could be called that, was little more than a converted storage space off the kitchen, containing a narrow cot and a small chest for her belongings. To her relief, Prescott had not visited her room that first night, though his lingering gaze at supper had made his intentions clear enough. He had instead presented her with a list of duties that would keep her occupied from dawn until well after dusk, beginning with preparing his breakfast. "The stage arrives at 10, Prescott informed her as he picked at the eggs she'd prepared. "I've arranged for Dr. Miller to receive your sister's medicine directly. You may make your weekly visit tomorrow afternoon, from 1 o'clock until 3, not a minute more." Mary nodded, her expression carefully neutral despite the rage and humiliation burning within her. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." "Augustus," he corrected, reaching to grasp her wrist as she cleared his plate. "In private, you will address me as Augustus." She forced herself not to recoil from his touch. "Yes, Augustus." His smile made her stomach turn. "Good girl. Now the floors need scrubbing, and I expect the silver polished before dinner." The morning passed in a blur of menial tasks, each more demeaning than the last. From her vantage point at an upstairs window as she cleaned, Mary observed the daily rhythms of Idaho City, the miners heading to what remained of the diggings, merchants opening their shops, and the stagecoach arriving precisely at 10. Her heart leaped as she spotted Dr. Miller receiving a package from the driver. Emma would get her medicine today. The knowledge fortified Mary's resolve she could endure this arrangement if it meant her sister would live. It was while she was hanging laundry in the yard that afternoon that she first noticed the stranger. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath a well-worn hat, he was leading a horse to the town smithy. Something in his purposeful stride caught her attention, a quality that set him apart from the usual drifters passing through. As if sensing her scrutiny, he glanced up, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the distance. Mary quickly looked away, resuming her task with renewed focus. The last thing she needed was to draw Prescott's jealousy by appearing to notice another man. Ethan Abernathy hadn't intended to stare, but the sight of the woman from yesterday, now clearly engaged in domestic service at Prescott's residence, confirmed his suspicions about the nature of her arrangement. The dark circles beneath her eyes told of a sleepless night, yet she worked with determined efficiency. Her copper hair caught in the autumn sunlight as she stretched to hang sheets on the line. "Fine animal you've got there," the blacksmith commented as Ethan led his horse into the smithy. "Quarter horse, Morgan quarter mix," Ethan replied, patting the gelding's neck. "Needs new shoes for the mountain trails. How soon can you manage it, for a horse this quality? I'll make time today." The blacksmith examined the animal's hooves with practiced hands. "You headed up to Montana like you mentioned at the prospector last night." Ethan nodded, unsurprised that his business was already common knowledge. Small towns ran on gossip. "That's the plan. My brother's ranch needs another pair of hands. Shame. Idaho could use more men like you ones who ask the right questions." The blacksmith's voice lowered. "Heard you were asking about Prescott." "Just getting the lay of the land," Ethan replied carefully. The blacksmith straightened, wiping his hands on his apron. "Well, since you asked that girl you were watching just now, Mary Jameson, good woman from a respectable family. Her folks died of fever a few years back, leaving her and her sister Emma to fend for themselves." He nodded toward Prescott's house. "Word is the sister's got consumption bad, needs expensive medicine. Prescott's helping out with the cost." "At what price?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew. The blacksmith's expression hardened. "The kind no decent woman should have to pay. But folks mind their business in this town if they know what's good for them. And if they don't, then they tend to leave Idaho City rather suddenly if they're lucky." The blacksmith gave Ethan a measuring look. "Come back for your horse around 4, and Mr. Abernathy. A word of advice, whatever you're thinking, don't. Prescott owns this town in all but name." Ethan merely nodded, his mind already working through possibilities. As he walked back toward the hotel, he passed the doctor's office and paused, struck by a sudden idea. After a moment's consideration, he pushed open the door. Dr. Miller's office was neat but Spartan, with a waiting area that opened directly into an examination room. The doctor himself was an older man with kind eyes and a worried expression that deepened when Ethan introduced himself. "New in town, you say? Not feeling unwell, I hope?" The doctor gestured to a chair. "Fit as a horse, thankfully," Ethan assured him, taking the offered seat. "Actually, I'm here about Mary Jameson and her sister." The doctor's expression immediately shuddered. "I'm afraid I can't discuss my patients, Mr. Abernathy. Professional ethics." "I understand completely," Ethan said smoothly. "I'm not asking for details of their conditions. I only wondered about the cost of the medicine that arrived today. For the sister Emma, I believe, Doctor." Miller's surprise was evident. "And why would that concern you?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Let's just say I've seen the arrangement Miss Jameson has made to pay for it, and I'm in a position to offer an alternative." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. The medicine is indeed expensive, imported from San Francisco, specially formulated for tuberculosis cases. But the price Prescott quoted her. He hesitated, then continued more firmly. The actual cost is significantly less than what Miss Jameson believes. How much less? The medicine itself costs $75 for a 3-month supply. Prescott is charging her $200. Ethan's jaw tightened. And the contract she signed? I haven't seen it, but I've heard rumors about similar arrangements Prescott has made with other vulnerable women. The doctor's disgust was evident. Miss Jameson isn't the first, though she may be the most desperate. Her devotion to her sister is remarkable. What would happen if someone else paid her debt? Dr. Miller blinked in surprise. Legally speaking, the debt would be cleared, but knowing Prescott. He shook his head. He's not a man who likes to lose, especially something or someone he considers his property. I see. Ethan rose to leave. Thank you for your time, Doctor. Mr. Abernathy, the doctor called as Ethan reached the door. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Prescott has powerful friends. With a nod of acknowledgement, Ethan departed, his course of action becoming clearer by the minute. First, he'd need to see the contract Mary had signed. Then he'd need to determine just how much influence Prescott truly wielded in Idaho City. And finally, he'd need to convince a proud, desperate woman to accept help from a stranger. None of it would be easy, but as Ethan made his way toward the bank to inquire about his own finances, he found himself more resolved than he'd felt in years. Something about Mary Jameson's situation had awakened a sense of purpose he'd thought long buried under the weight of his own troubled past. The afternoon waned as Mary completed her endless list of chores, her hands raw from scrubbing and polishing. Prescott had left for his office at the Mercantile after lunch, promising to return for dinner promptly at 6. The brief respite from his presence allowed her shoulders to relax slightly as she prepared vegetables for the evening meal. A knock at the back door startled her. Visitors to Prescott's residence typically used the formal entrance, and Mary wasn't expecting deliveries. Wiping her hands on her apron, she cautiously opened the door to find the tall stranger she'd noticed earlier standing on the step, hat in hand. Miss Jameson. His voice was deep but gentle, his eyes a striking shade of green meeting hers directly. Mary glanced nervously over her shoulder before responding. Yes, can I help you? My name is Ethan Abernathy. I need to speak with you about your arrangement with Augustus Prescott. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what you mean. If you're looking for Mr. Prescott, he's at the Mercantile. She began to close the door, but Ethan placed his hand against it, not forcefully, but with enough presence to give her pause. I spoke with Dr. Miller about your sister's medicine. The real cost. Mary froze, the implications of his words sinking in. You have no right, she whispered fiercely. This is none of your concern. Perhaps not, Ethan conceded, but I'm making it my concern. May I come in, just for a moment? I promise I mean no harm. Every instinct warned against allowing a stranger into Prescott's home, and yet something in Ethan Abernathy's direct gaze compelled her trust. After a moment's hesitation, Mary stepped aside, allowing him to enter the kitchen. Mr. Prescott will return at 6, she warned, remaining near the door. Whatever you have to say, please say it quickly. Ethan nodded, maintaining a respectful distance. The medicine your sister needs costs $75, not $200. Prescott is exploiting your desperation. The revelation, though shocking, didn't entirely surprise her. Even if that's true, what difference does it make? I've signed a contract. I'd like to see that contract if possible. Mary's laugh was hollow. He keeps it locked in his office, and even if you could see it, what then? The agreement is binding. Every agreement has terms that can be met. Ethan countered. If someone were to pay your debt the actual cost of the medicine plus whatever reasonable interest Prescott might claim, he would have no legal hold over you. Mary stared at him, comprehension dawning. You're offering to pay my debt. Why? What do you want in return? Nothing. Seeing her skepticism, he continued, I had a mother who found herself in a similar situation after my father died. No one helped her. I have the means to help you, Miss Jameson, and I choose to do so. People don't just help strangers without expecting something in return, Mary insisted, though her voice wavered. Especially not in Idaho City. I'm not from Idaho City, Ethan said simply. And sometimes, people do the right thing because it's right, not because there's something in it for them. Before Mary could respond, the distant sound of the front door opening sent panic through her. You need to leave, she hissed, moving quickly to usher Ethan toward the back door. If he finds you here, Mary, Prescott's voice called from the foyer. Is dinner nearly ready? Yes, Mr. Prescott, she called back, her voice impressively steady despite her racing heart. To Ethan, she whispered urgently, Go, please. Ethan slipped through the door, pausing only to say, I'll be at the Idaho house if you change your mind. Room 4. Mary closed the door just as Prescott entered the kitchen, his gaze immediately suspicious as he noted her flushed cheeks. Who were you talking to? Just myself, she lied smoothly, turning back to the stove. Old habit from living with Emma. Prescott studied her for a long moment before seemingly accepting her explanation. I've had word from Dr. Miller. Your sister responded well to the first dose of medicine. Relief flooded Mary despite her current predicament. Thank you for telling me. I'm not entirely without compassion, Prescott said, moving closer until he stood directly behind her. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, heavy and possessive. I take care of what's mine, Mary. You do well to remember that. She forced herself to remain still under his touch, even as revulsion crawled across her skin. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Good. His hands lingered a moment longer before he released her. I have business to attend to in my study. Call me when it's served. As soon as he left, Mary sagged against the counter, her composure cracking. Ethan Abernathy's unexpected offer circled in her mind, tempting and dangerous in equal measure. If Prescott discovered she'd been speaking with another man about her contract, the consequences would be severe. And yet, the possibility of freedom, of escaping this gilded cage while still securing Emma's treatment, was almost too tantalizing to resist. She finished preparing dinner mechanically, her thoughts a tumultuous storm of hope and fear. When she finally called Prescott to the dining room, she had reached no decision, only the certainty that whatever choice she made would irrevocably alter her future. The following afternoon, true to his word, Prescott allowed Mary to visit Emma. The crisp autumn air felt like freedom after the stifling atmosphere of Prescott's house, and Mary walked the short distance to her cabin with quickened steps, her heart lighter than it had been since signing the contract. Emma was sitting up in bed when Mary arrived. Some color returned to her cheeks and her breathing noticeably easier. Mary, she exclaimed, reaching for her sister's hands, the medicine is working already. Dr. Miller says I'm responding better than he expected. Mary embraced Emma carefully, tears of relief stinging her eyes. That's wonderful news. How are you feeling otherwise? Is Mrs. Hollister checking on you regularly? She's been very kind, Emma assured her, though her expression grew troubled. But Mary, she told me things about Mr. Prescott, about the arrangements he's made with other women. Please tell me you haven't. Don't worry about me, Mary deflected, busying herself with straightening the already neat cabin. The important thing is that you're getting better. At what cost? Emma persisted, her voice strengthening with emotion. "I'd rather face this illness than know you've sacrificed yourself for me." Mary turned to face her sister, unwilling to lie directly to those searching blue eyes. "It's only temporary. 3 months and then the debt will be paid." Emma's face crumpled. "Oh, Mary, I never wanted this." "It was my choice," Mary insisted, sitting beside her sister and taking her hands. "And there might be another way." Hesitantly, she told Emma about Ethan Abernathy's visit and his offer to pay her debt. "You should accept his help," Emma said immediately. "If this Mr. Abernathy can free you from Prescott's contract—" "It's not that simple," Mary cut in. "We know nothing about this man. His motives could be just as selfish as Prescott's. And even if they aren't, Prescott isn't likely to let me go easily, regardless of whether the debt is paid. But surely the law in Idaho City, does what Augustus Prescott tells it to do." Mary squeezed Emma's hands gently. "Don't fret about this. Focus on getting stronger. That's all that matters to me." Their conversation turned to lighter topics for the remainder of the visit, though the shadow of Mary's situation hung between them. As the appointed hour for her return approached, Mary embraced her sister one final time. "I'll be back next week," she promised. "And Emma, please don't try to intervene. Prescott would only make things worse if he thought you were causing trouble." With a heavy heart, Mary left the cabin, steeling herself for the return to her gilded prison. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she almost collided with Ethan Abernathy as he emerged from between two buildings. "Mr. Abernathy," she gasped, startled by his sudden appearance. "Are you following me?" "Not exactly," he replied, falling into step beside her. "I was hoping to catch you during your visit to your sister. How is she?" "Improving," Mary answered cautiously, glancing around to ensure they weren't observed. "The medicine is helping." "I'm glad to hear it." They walked in silence for a few steps before Ethan continued. "Have you considered my offer?" Mary hesitated, her earlier conversation with Emma fresh in her mind. "I have, but I still don't understand what you would gain from helping me. Peace of mind, perhaps." Ethan's expression was thoughtful. "I've spent too many years looking the other way when I could have made a difference. This is a chance to change that pattern." "Even if I were to accept," Mary said slowly, "Prescott wouldn't simply let me walk away. He's not a man who loses gracefully." "I've given that some thought," Ethan admitted. "It would require careful planning and possibly leaving Idaho City. Do you and your sister have somewhere you could go once she's well enough to travel?" Mary considered this. "Our aunt lives in Denver. She offered us a home after our parents died, but Emma was too weak to travel then." "Denver would be a fresh start," Ethan observed. "Far enough that Prescott's influence wouldn't reach." They had nearly reached Prescott's residence. Mary slowed her steps, acutely aware that time was running out. "Why should I trust you? You're a stranger to me." "You shouldn't trust easily," Ethan agreed. "Not after what Prescott has done. But I'm staying at the Idaho house for at least another week. Ask around about me if you like. I have nothing to hide." Mary studied him, noting the honesty in his green eyes and the way he maintained a respectful distance even as they spoke of intimate matters. Against her better judgment, she found herself wanting to trust him. "I need time to think," she finally said, "and to discuss it further with Emma." "Of course." Ethan tipped his hat. "You know where to find me when you decide." They parted ways a block from Prescott's house, Mary continuing alone with her thoughts in turmoil. The prospect of freedom tantalized her, but the risks were enormous. If Prescott discovered her plotting to leave, his revenge would be swift and merciless. And yet, the alternative remaining under his control for the full 3 months was becoming increasingly unbearable. Inside the house, Mary resumed her duties, working methodically through the evening tasks while carefully avoiding Prescott's wandering hands and suggestive comments. That night, as she lay on her narrow cot in the small room off the kitchen, she made her decision. She would accept Ethan Abernathy's help, but on her own terms. She would need to see the contract first to understand exactly what legal hold Prescott had over her, and she would need assurances that Emma's continued treatment was secure. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would find a way to get a message to Ethan at the Idaho house. If his offer was genuine, they would need to move quickly and carefully. If it was a trap, better to discover it now than when she and Emma were even more vulnerable. Mary rose before dawn the next morning, her plan taking shape as she kindled the kitchen fire and began preparing Prescott's breakfast. The merchant kept to a predictable schedule, spending most days at his mercantile and evenings at home, or at the prospector's dream playing cards. If she timed it right, she might have a chance to search his study during his absence. Prescott arrived for breakfast punctually at 7, already dressed for business in a pressed suit and polished boots. "I'll be at the mercantile all day," he informed her between bites of egg. "Sheriff Taylor and Judge Wilson are dining here tonight. I expect the table set with my best china and silver by 6. Mary nodded obediently, her pulse quickening at this unexpected stroke of luck. With Prescott occupied at the mercantile and important dinner guests expected, she would have most of the day uninterrupted. "Yes, Mr. Prescott. Will there be anything special you'd like prepared for dinner? The roast beef you made Sunday was acceptable. Something similar will do." He rose from the table, adjusting his waistcoat. "And Mary, wear the blue dress I purchased for you. It complements your attributes." She forced a smile, suppressing a shudder at the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Of course." As soon as Prescott left for the mercantile, Mary sprang into action. She completed her morning chores with efficient haste, ensuring the house was immaculate in case Prescott returned unexpectedly. By mid-morning, she stood before the locked door of his study, her heart pounding in her chest. The key, she knew, was kept on a ring Prescott carried with him, but Mary had observed him often enough to know his habits. Kneeling before the door, she removed a hairpin from her coiled tresses and inserted it into the lock. Her father, a former locksmith before turning to prospecting, had taught both his daughters this skill just in case, though Mary doubted he'd envisioned these particular circumstances. After several tense minutes of careful manipulation, the lock yielded with a satisfying click. Mary slipped into the study, closing the door quietly behind her. Prescott's sanctuary was opulent compared to the rest of the house. Persian carpet underfoot, leather-bound books lining one wall, and a massive oak desk dominating the center of the room. She began her search methodically, rifling through drawers and examining the papers on the desk. In the top right drawer, secured by another easily picked lock, she found what she was seeking: a leather portfolio containing several contracts, hers among them. The document was just as she remembered, though reading it again with clearer eyes revealed additional clauses she'd overlooked in her desperation. Most damning was the section stating that any violation of the terms, including moral impropriety or attempts to flee, would result in immediate forfeiture of any payments made and additional penalties to be determined by Prescott himself. Mary quickly copied the most relevant details onto a scrap of paper, then returned the contract to its place. As she continued searching, a small ledger caught her attention. Inside were meticulous records of Prescott's various arrangements with women in Idaho City and surrounding settlements. The entries were coldly businesslike, detailing amounts loaned, services required in payment, and notes on each woman's performance and compliance. Nausea rose in Mary's throat as she realized the extent of Prescott's predatory practices. Some names she recognized: women who had mysteriously left town or who now avoided eye contact when they passed on the street. Others were strangers, but the pattern was unmistakable. Prescott had been exploiting desperate women for years, apparently without consequence. Carefully replacing the ledger, Mary completed her search, finding nothing else of immediate relevance. She slipped out of the study, relocking the door behind her, and returned to the kitchen to begin dinner preparations. The roast would take hours to cook properly, giving her a perfect excuse to visit the butcher and perhaps deliver a message to Ethan Abernathy along the way. The autumn air was brisk as Mary made her way to the butcher's shop, her copied notes and hastily scribbled message to Ethan securely tucked in her pocket. The streets of Idaho City bustled with the usual midday activity, miners and merchants going about their business with little notice of the auburn-haired woman on her domestic errand. After selecting a suitable cut of beef for the evening's dinner, Mary made a seemingly casual detour past the Idaho house. The hotel's modest lobby was empty save for a drowsy clerk at the front desk. Gathering her courage, Mary approached him with a friendly smile. "Good morning. I have a message for one of your guests, Mr. Abernathy, in room 4. The clerk eyed her curiously. "Mr. Abernathy stepped out about an hour ago, miss. Said he was heading to the livery to check on his horse." "I see." Mary hesitated, then produced her folded note. "Would you be kind enough to deliver this when he returns? It's rather important." The clerk accepted the note with a knowing smirk that made Mary's cheeks burn. "Of course, miss. Any message from a pretty lady is important, I reckon." "Thank you," she murmured, turning quickly to leave before the clerk could ask questions she couldn't answer. As she hurried back toward Prescott's house, Mary nearly collided with a familiar figure rounding the corner: Ethan Abernathy himself, returning from the direction of the livery. He steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm, quickly releasing her when he recognized who she was. "Miss Jameson," he greeted, tipping his hat. "This is fortunate. I was hoping to speak with you." Mary glanced nervously around, acutely aware they were standing in full view of the main street. "I just left a note for you at the hotel," she said in a low voice. "I need to get back before I'm missed, but I've seen the contract. It's worse than I thought." Ethan's expression grew serious. "Can you meet me later, somewhere private?" "The old church at the edge of town," Mary suggested after a moment's thought. "It's been abandoned since the new one was built. I can slip away after dinner around 8. "I'll be there," Ethan promised. "Be careful, Miss Jameson." With a nod, Mary continued on her way, clutching her package from the butcher like a shield. The exchange had been brief, but her heart raced with equal parts fear and anticipation. Tonight, she would take the first real step toward reclaiming her freedom if all went according to plan. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity as Mary prepared for Prescott's important dinner. She roasted the beef to perfection, prepared fresh bread and vegetables from the garden, and set the dining table with the fine china and silver as instructed. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready, and she retreated to her small room to change into the blue dress Prescott had demanded she wear. The garment was finer than anything Mary had owned before, silk taffeta in a shade that did indeed complement her coloring, but its origin made her skin crawl. It had appeared in her room a week after she'd arrived, along with other items of clothing far more revealing than anything she would have chosen for herself. The message had been clear. He was dressing her to his taste, like a doll for his amusement. At precisely 6, Prescott returned home with his guest, Sheriff Taylor, a portly man with a perpetually ruddy complexion, and Judge Wilson, whose austere demeanor belied the lecherous glances he cast in Mary's direction as she served dinner. The men discussed business and local politics while Mary moved silently around them, refilling glasses and clearing plates. "You've done well for yourself, Augustus," the judge commented as Mary served dessert. "A fine home, thriving business, and pleasant company." His gaze lingered on Mary's figure in the close-fitting dress. "Indeed," Prescott agreed, his proprietary smile making Mary's stomach turn. "Miss Jameson has proven quite adaptable to her position here." "Pity about her sister's illness," Sheriff Taylor interjected, helping himself to more brandy. "Though fortunate you were able to assist with the medicine. Very generous." "I believe in helping those in need," Prescott replied smoothly, "especially when they show proper appreciation." The men shared knowing laughs while Mary focused on maintaining her composure. These were the most powerful men in Idaho City, all complicit in Prescott's exploitation. Any hope that local authorities might intervene on her behalf evaporated as she observed their easy camaraderie. By 8 o'clock, the men had moved to Prescott's study for cigars and more brandy, giving Mary the opportunity she needed. She quickly cleaned the kitchen, then slipped out the back door into the darkness, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the evening chill. The abandoned church stood on a slight hill at the town's northern edge, its weathered spire silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Mary approached cautiously, her heart pounding with every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior illuminated only by moonlight filtering through broken windows. "Mr. Abernathy," she called softly, peering into the shadows. "Here." Ethan stepped from behind a partially collapsed pulpit, a lantern in his hand casting warm light across the abandoned sanctuary. "You made it safely." Mary nodded, moving further into the church. "Prescott is occupied with the sheriff and judge. They'll be drinking for hours." "The sheriff and judge," Ethan repeated grimly. "That confirms what I suspected about Prescott's influence." "They're all cut from the same cloth," Mary agreed, bitter resignation in her voice. "I found more than just my contract in Prescott's study. He keeps records of all his arrangements with women. There have been dozens over the years." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then it's even more important we get you and your sister away from here. Tell me about the contract." Mary produced the notes she'd copied earlier. "It's as binding as he claimed. 3 months of service in exchange for the medicine, with severe penalties if I attempt to leave early. The most troubling part is this clause about moral impropriety. It's so vaguely worded that Prescott could claim almost anything as a violation." Ethan studied the notes carefully. "There's nothing here about what happens if a third party settles the debt," he observed. "That might be our opening." "Even if it is," Mary said, "Prescott won't simply let me walk away. You saw who his friends are. They control the law in this town." "Then we'll need to be prepared to leave immediately after settling the debt," Ethan replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "How soon could your sister travel?" Mary considered this. "Dr. Miller says the medicine is working remarkably well. In another week or two, she might be strong enough for a short journey by wagon. That gives us time to arrange everything." Ethan paced the length of the dilapidated altar. "I have sufficient funds to settle your debt, even at Prescott's inflated price, and to secure transportation to Denver for you and Emma." Mary stared at him, still struggling to comprehend his willingness to help. "Why would you do all this for strangers? There must be something you want in return." Ethan stopped pacing, his expression solemn in the lantern light. "My mother faced a similar situation after my father died. A local banker offered to help with our mortgage in exchange for her companionship. She refused, and we lost our ranch." She died a year later, working herself to exhaustion to keep my brother and me fed. I'm sorry, Mary said softly. I was 15, Ethan continued, his voice distant with memory. Old enough to understand what had happened, but too young to do anything about it. I swore then that, if I ever had the chance to prevent another woman from facing such a choice, I would. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Mary felt her remaining doubts begin to crumble. Even if I accept your help, she said slowly, there's still the matter of getting Emma safely out of Idaho City. Prescott watches her closely through his network of informants. I've been thinking about that, Ethan replied. The cattle drive I was with passed through a settlement about 20 miles east of here. It's small, but there's a doctor and regular stage service to Denver, if we could get Emma there without raising suspicions. Mrs. Hollister might help, Mary suggested, warming to the idea. She's been caring for Emma in my absence and has no love for Prescott. Her late husband lost their mining claim to him years ago. They continued planning well into the night, outlining a strategy that would unfold over the next 2 weeks. Ethan would arrange transportation and secure passage to Denver, while making discreet inquiries about the legal standing of Mary's contract. Mary would maintain her role in Prescott's household, while gathering only the most essential belongings for herself and Emma. When the time was right, they would act swiftly, settling the debt and departing Idaho City before Prescott could retaliate. As their meeting drew to a close, Mary felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks' hope. I still don't know if this will work, she admitted, but I'm grateful for the chance to try. It will work, Ethan assured her, his confidence bolstering her own. 2 weeks from now, you and Emma will be on your way to Denver, free from Prescott's influence. Mary nodded, pulling her shawl tighter as they prepared to leave the church separately. I should go first, if anyone sees us together. Of course. Ethan extinguished the lantern. Same time 3 days from now, I should have more information by then. 3 days, Mary agreed. She hesitated at the door, then turned back to face him in the moonlight. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. Regardless of what happens, thank you for offering me hope when I had none. Before he could respond, she slipped out into the night, her figure quickly disappearing among the shadows of the sleeping town. Ethan remained in the doorway of the abandoned church, watching until she was safely out of sight. The plan was risky, perhaps foolishly so, but seeing the renewed determination in Mary's eyes had confirmed he was doing the right thing. As he made his own way back to the Idaho house, Ethan reflected on how thoroughly his plans had changed in just a few days. His brother's ranch in Montana would have to wait. For now, his purpose was clear. Help Mary and Emma Jameson escape Augustus Prescott's clutches, whatever the cost. The days that followed took on a surreal quality for Mary. Outwardly, she maintained her role as Prescott's housekeeper, cooking his meals, cleaning his home, and enduring his increasingly bold advances with feigned submission. Inwardly, she was cataloging belongings, memorizing schedules, and counting down the hours until her next clandestine meeting with Ethan. During her weekly visit to Emma, Mary cautiously shared aspects of the escape plan, careful to speak in generalities in case Prescott had somehow arranged for them to be monitored. Emma, continuing to improve under Dr. Miller's care and the expensive medicine, embraced the idea with guarded optimism. Mrs. Hollister says this Mr. Abernathy has been asking discreet questions around town, Emma reported, her voice stronger than it had been in months. She thinks he's honorable, says he reminds her of Pa. The comparison warmed Mary's heart. He's taking an enormous risk for us. I still don't fully understand why. Perhaps some men are simply decent, Emma suggested with a small smile. It wouldn't hurt you to believe that might be true. Perhaps, Mary conceded, though years of hardship had taught her to be wary of seemingly altruistic offers. How are you feeling? Truthfully. Better every day, Emma assured her. Dr. Miller says the worst has passed. I tire easily, but my fever is gone and the coughing fits are less frequent. I could travel in a week or so if necessary. Good. Mary squeezed her sister's hand, because that's exactly what we're planning. On the night of their second meeting at the abandoned church, Ethan arrived with both good news and concerning developments. I've secured a wagon and team, he reported as they settled into what had become their makeshift war room. And I've made arrangements for accommodations along the route to Denver. That's wonderful, Mary said, relief evident in her voice. What about the contract? Here, Ethan's expression grew troubled. I spoke with a lawyer in the next county, someone with no ties to Prescott. He confirmed what we suspected. Legally speaking, if the debt is paid in full, the contract should be void. But Prescott won't see it that way, Mary finished for him. Exactly, and there's more. Ethan hesitated before continuing. Prescott has been asking questions about me around town. The bartender at the Prospectors warned me yesterday to watch my back. Mary paled. He suspects something? Maybe, though he has no reason to connect me specifically to you. More likely he's just wary of a stranger spending time in his territory without clear business. Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Mary had come to recognize as a sign of his concern. Either way, we need to accelerate our timeline. How soon could Emma travel, Doctor? Miller says another week would be ideal, but she could manage now if absolutely necessary. Let's aim for 4 days from now, Ethan decided. That gives us time to finalize preparations without risking Prescott becoming too suspicious of either of us. They settled on a plan. Ethan would pay Mary's debt directly to Prescott at the Mercantile during business hours, ensuring witnesses to the transaction. Simultaneously, Mrs. Hollister would help Emma pack her essential belongings and medication. If all went well, they would rendezvous at the abandoned church after nightfall and depart immediately for the settlement to the east, traveling through the night to put distance between themselves and any potential pursuit. What about you? Mary asked as they prepared to part ways. You're risking Prescott's wrath as much as we are. I can handle myself, Ethan assured her with a confidence that, despite everything, Mary found herself believing. Besides, I still plan to continue to Montana eventually. This is just a detour. Their eyes met in the dim light of the church, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection deeper than their practical alliance against Prescott. Mary quickly looked away, unsettled by the warmth that had bloomed in her chest. 4 days, then, she said briskly, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. I'll find a way to get word to Mrs. Hollister tomorrow. Be careful, Ethan cautioned, his voice low. We're close, Mary. Don't take unnecessary risks now. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it lingered in the air between them as they parted ways once more. The following days were a careful dance of preparation and pretense. Mary continued her duties at Prescott's house, while surreptitiously gathering the few possessions she couldn't bear to leave behind. She managed to send a coded message to Mrs. Hollister through Dr. Miller during his regular visit to check on Emma, setting their plan in motion. Prescott, meanwhile, seemed increasingly agitated, though whether due to suspicion or other business concerns, Mary couldn't determine. He spent more time at the Mercantile and returned home later each evening, often smelling of whiskey and eyeing Mary with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You seem distracted lately, he commented the night before their planned escape as Mary served his dinner. I hope you're not finding your position here, Unsuitable. Not at all, Mr. Prescott, Mary replied, careful to keep her voice neutral. I'm merely concerned about my sister. Doctor. Miller mentioned her recovery might plateau without continued treatment. Prescott studied her, his small eyes calculating. Your concern is admirable if unnecessary. I've already ordered additional medicine. Your sister will receive the care she needs for as long as you fulfill your obligations here. The implication was clear and Mary suppressed a shudder. You're very generous. I am, he agreed, his smile oily, and I expect appropriate gratitude. Perhaps tonight you might join me in my chambers after you've finished the dishes. It's time we discussed expanding your duties. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs, but she managed a deferential nod. As you wish. Later, as she washed the dinner dishes with trembling hands, Mary knew their plan couldn't come soon enough. Tomorrow would determine everything: her freedom, Emma's health, their future. And she realized with a start her feelings for Ethan Abernathy, which had grown from cautious gratitude to something far more complex in the short time she'd known him. Morning arrived crisp and clear, the autumn sun casting long shadows across Idaho City as its residents began their daily routines. In Prescott's kitchen, Mary prepared breakfast with mechanical precision, her mind focused on the hours ahead. She had feigned a headache the previous night, avoiding Prescott's chambers by retiring early to her own room with a cool cloth pressed to her forehead. His displeasure had been evident, but he had not forced the issue, a small mercy that would not be repeated tonight if their plan failed. I'll be at the Mercantile until closing, Prescott informed her as he finished his coffee. Sheriff Taylor mentioned a drifter has been asking questions around town, some cowboy heading to Montana. I want to ensure he's not planning any trouble. Mary kept her expression carefully neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. I'll have dinner ready at the usual time. As soon as Prescott left, Mary sprang into action. She gathered her meager belongings, a photograph of her parents, a small jewelry box containing her mother's wedding ring, and a few essential items of clothing, and concealed them in a bundle beneath her bed. Then she continued her normal routine, cleaning the house meticulously one last time while watching the clock with mounting anticipation. Across town at the Idaho house, Ethan Abernathy was making his own preparations. He counted out $200 in cash, the full amount of Mary's supposed debt, and secured it in an inside pocket of his vest. The rest of his savings, along with provisions for the journey to Denver, were already packed in saddlebags. His horse was ready at the livery, and a wagon had been arranged through a discreet arrangement with the blacksmith, who had no love for Prescott. At precisely noon, Ethan entered Prescott's Mercantile and Loans, his posture relaxed but alert as he surveyed the busy establishment. Prescott stood behind the counter, deep in conversation with a customer, but his gaze snapped to Ethan as soon as the bell above the door announced his arrival. Mr. Abernathy, Prescott greeted with false warmth once the customer departed. What brings you to my establishment today? Supplies for your journey north, perhaps? Actually, I've come about a debt, Ethan replied, approaching the counter with measured steps. Mary Jameson's debt, to be precise. Prescott's affable mask slipped momentarily, revealing sharp suspicion. Miss Jameson's affairs are private business between her and myself. I don't see how they concern you. I'm making them my concern, Ethan said calmly, extracting the envelope of cash from his vest. $200, the full amount she allegedly owes you for her sister's medicine. The Mercantile had grown quiet, the few customers present watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Prescott's face flushed with anger, but awareness of his audience kept his response measured. "This is most irregular, Mr. Abernathy. Miss Jameson and I have a binding contract. A contract for a debt which I am settling in full." Ethan placed the money on the counter. "Unless there's some reason you'd refuse payment," it was a challenge, delivered before witnesses. Prescott's jaw worked as he considered his options, his gaze darting to the onlookers before returning to Ethan. "Very well," he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "But this doesn't change Miss Jameson's obligations to me. A contract is a contract." "Actually," Ethan countered, producing a folded document from his coat pocket, "I've taken the liberty of consulting with a judge in Boise about the matter. He was quite clear that once the debt is settled, any services contracted in payment of that debt are no longer binding." It was a bluff. Ethan had spoken to a lawyer, not a judge, and certainly not one from the territorial capital, but delivered with such confidence that several onlookers nodded in agreement. Prescott's expression darkened further as he realized he was cornered, at least in this public setting. "We'll see about that," he muttered, snatching the money from the counter and stuffing it into a drawer. "Now, if there's nothing else, I have a business to run." Ethan tipped his hat, satisfaction warming his chest despite the knowledge that this was only the first skirmish in what promised to be a difficult day. "Good day, Mr. Prescott. I trust you'll inform Miss Jameson that her debt has been settled." Without waiting for a response, Ethan turned and left the mercantile, acutely aware of Prescott's venomous glare boring into his back. Outside, he paused to speak with the blacksmith, confirming their arrangements for that evening before continuing on toward Dr. Miller's office. The most dangerous part of their plan was now in motion. All that remained was to ensure Emma was ready to travel, and to get word to Mary that the debt had been paid back at Prescott's residence. Mary was startled by a knock at the back door shortly after 2 o'clock. She opened it cautiously to find Dr. Miller standing on the step, medical bag in hand. "Doctor, is something wrong with Emma?" "Nothing at all," he assured her quickly. "In fact, she's improving remarkably. I've just come from checking on her and administering her medication." He glanced over his shoulder before continuing in a lower voice. "I've also come to deliver a message from Mr. Abernathy. The debt has been paid in full, witnessed by half a dozen townspeople at the mercantile." Relief flooded through Mary so intensely that she had to grip the doorframe for support. "Then we're proceeding as planned. Indeed. Mrs. Hollister is helping Emma prepare as we speak. You're to meet them at the old church at sundown." The doctor hesitated, then added, "Prescott was not pleased." Sheriff Taylor was seen heading into the mercantile after Abernathy left. "You should be prepared for trouble." "We will be," Mary promised. "Thank you, Doctor, for everything." Dr. Miller nodded gravely. "I've included extra medication for Emma in her things enough for 2 months. By then, you should be established in Denver and can consult with a physician there." As the doctor departed, Mary closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The die was cast. There could be no turning back now. For the next few hours, Mary continued her duties while watching the clock and listening for any sign of Prescott's early return. She prepared dinner as usual, setting the table for one and leaving the roast warming in the oven. As the shadows lengthened across the yard, she retrieved her hidden bundle and slipped out the back door, casting one last glance at the house that had been her prison for the past weeks. The abandoned church loomed against the twilight sky as Mary approached, her steps quickening despite the weight of her belongings. The building appeared deserted, but as she pushed open the weathered door, she found Emma waiting inside, bundled in blankets on a makeshift pallet, with Mrs. Hollister hovering nearby. "Mary," Emma exclaimed, her face lighting with relief, "you made it." "Of course I did," Mary replied, embracing her sister carefully. "How are you feeling? Is this too much?" "I'm fine," Emma insisted, though her pallor suggested otherwise. "Doctor Miller gave me something for the journey. Where's Mr. Abernathy?" As if summoned by her question, the church door opened again and Ethan entered, followed by the blacksmith pulling a covered wagon. "Everyone's here," he observed with evident relief. "Good, we need to move quickly." Prescott was at the sheriff's office when I last passed. With efficient movements, they transferred Emma to the wagon, arranging blankets and pillows to make her as comfortable as possible for the journey ahead. Mrs. Hollister embraced both sisters tearfully. "Godspeed you safely to Denver," she said, pressing a small package into Mary's hands. "Just a few provisions for the road. I've included the address of my cousin there. She'll help you find your footing." "Thank you for everything," Mary replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll write when we're settled." The blacksmith, after securing the team, clasped Ethan's hand firmly. "The main road east is likely to be watched. Take the old mining trail past Granite Creek. It's rougher terrain, but you'll avoid any unwelcome attention." Ethan nodded his understanding. "We're in your debt." "No debt between friends," the blacksmith countered. "Just get these ladies safely away from Prescott. That's payment enough." As final preparations were completed, Ethan assisted Mary onto the driver's bench beside him. The wagon was simple but sturdy, its canvas cover providing some protection from the elements and concealing their passage from casual observation. Inside, Emma lay propped on her pallet, visibly exhausted but determined. "Ready?" Ethan asked quietly, his eyes meeting Mary's in the gathering darkness. She nodded, a strange mixture of fear and anticipation swirling in her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be." With a gentle flick of the reins, Ethan set the wagon in motion, guiding the team away from the abandoned church and toward the eastern edge of town. They traveled slowly at first, avoiding main streets and keeping to shadows whenever possible. Mary's pulse quickened each time they passed near occupied buildings, half expecting Sheriff Taylor to emerge and halt their progress. But the streets of Idaho City remained quiet as they made their way toward the outskirts, the evening routines of its inhabitants providing a cloak of normalcy for their escape. It wasn't until they had nearly reached the edge of town that a shout pierced the twilight calm. "There! Stop that wagon!" Mary's head whipped around to see Sheriff Taylor emerging from a side street, his bulky figure unmistakable even in the dimness. Behind him, moving with surprising speed for his size, came Augustus Prescott. "Hold on," Ethan muttered, snapping the reins sharply. The horses surged forward, the wagon lurching as it picked up speed. Mary braced herself against the bench, her free hand reaching back to steady Emma as they bounced over the rutted road. "Stop in the name of the law," Taylor bellowed, but his voice was already fading as the wagon pulled away. "Are they following?" Ethan asked, his focus on guiding the team through the deepening darkness. Mary twisted to look behind them. "I don't see them. They were on foot." "They'll likely fetch horses," Ethan warned. "We need to reach the mining trail before they can organize a proper pursuit." The wagon rattled onward, leaving the last buildings of Idaho City behind as they plunged into the wilderness beyond. The trail narrowed, forcing Ethan to slow the team despite the urgency of their situation. Overhead, stars emerged in a velvet sky, offering just enough light to navigate by once their eyes adjusted to the darkness. "How are you doing, Emma?" Mary called over her shoulder. "Still breathing," came the weak reply, followed by a soft cough. "Don't worry about me, just keep going." For the next hour, they traveled in tense silence. The creaking of the wagon and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the only sounds in the vast Idaho night. The mining trail, when they reached it, was indeed rougher than the main road, a winding path that climbed into the foothills, following the course of long abandoned claims. "We'll stop briefly at Granite Creek to rest the horses," Ethan said as they negotiated a particularly steep section. "Then push on through the night. If we maintain this pace, we should reach Settler's Fork by morning." Mary nodded, though the prospect of an all-night journey concerned her. "Will Emma be able to endure it?" "I'm fine," her sister called from the wagon bed, her voice stronger than before. "The medication Dr. Miller gave me is helping, and anything's better than staying in Idaho City with Prescott on the warpath." Despite the gravity of their situation, Mary found herself smiling at Emma's resilience. Her sister had always been the optimistic one, finding silver linings even in the darkest clouds. It was a quality Mary had often envied, especially in the difficult years following their parents' deaths. As they crested a ridge, Ethan suddenly pulled the team to a halt, raising a hand for silence. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders moving at speed along the main road below. "Prescott's men," Ethan confirmed grimly. "They're heading east, probably assuming we took the direct route to the next settlement." Mary's heart raced. Will they realize their mistake? Eventually. But by then, we should be well ahead of them on this trail. Ethan set the wagon in motion again, guiding the team with expert hands through the difficult terrain. "Still, we'll need to be cautious. Prescott knows these mountains better than I do." The night deepened around them as they continued their journey, the temperature dropping steadily with the increasing elevation. Mary pulled her shawl tighter, glancing periodically at Ethan's profile in the starlight. He sat tall and alert, his focus unwavering as he navigated the treacherous path. In the short time she'd known him, he had proven himself far more than the drifting cowboy he claimed to be. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked suddenly, the question that had lingered since their first meeting finally finding voice. "And don't tell me it's just because of your mother." "There's more to it than that." Ethan was silent for so long that Mary thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear in the still night air. "I've spent the last 5 years drifting from place to place, taking whatever work came my way. After my mother died, my brother and I went our separate ways. He was always the responsible one, settled down, built a life. I chose a different path." His hands tightened on the reins. "It's taken me this long to realize I've been running from something, not toward anything." "What were you running from?" Mary asked, her voice equally soft. "Failing her," Ethan replied simply. "Not being able to save our ranch, not being man enough to stand up to the banker who tried to exploit her. By the time I was old enough to do something about it, she was gone." Mary's heart ached for the boy he had been, carrying such a burden of perceived failure. "So this is atonement, maybe at first," Ethan admitted. "But now—" He glanced at her, the starlight catching in his eyes. "Now it's something else entirely." The implication hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Mary looked away, her cheeks warming despite the chill air. After Prescott's predatory interest, she had thought herself immune to any man's attention. Yet Ethan's quiet declaration stirred something long dormant within her. "I hardly know you," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I know," he acknowledged, "and you have every reason to be wary. But when this is over, when you and Emma are safe in Denver, perhaps you might consider getting to know me better." Before Mary could formulate a response, a sharp crack echoed through the night, a rifle shot, followed by the splintering of wood as a bullet struck the wagon mere inches from where she sat. Ethan reacted instantly, urging the team to greater speed while pulling Mary down below the level of the bench. "Stay down," he shouted as another shot whistled overhead. "They've found us." Heart pounding, Mary peered over the edge of the wagon. In the darkness behind them, she could make out the silhouettes of 3 riders, one raising a rifle for another shot. "Emma," she cried, twisting to check on her sister. "I'm all right," Emma called back, her voice tight with fear. "Who's shooting at us?" "Prescott's men," Ethan answered grimly, guiding the wagon around a sharp bend in the trail. "Must have split their forces to cover both routes." A third shot rang out, this one going wide as the rough terrain made aiming difficult for their pursuers. Ethan pressed the team harder, the wagon jolting violently as it bounced over rocks and ruts in the barely visible trail. "There's a cutoff ahead," he called to Mary. "Leads down to a creek bed. If we can reach it, the trees might provide cover." Mary clung to the bench as Ethan maneuvered the wagon toward the cutoff, a steep descent that in daylight would have been challenging enough. In near darkness, it was terrifying. The horses balked momentarily at the sharp angle, then plunged forward under Ethan's firm guidance. The wagon tilted precariously, threatening to overturn as it slid more than rolled down the incline. Mary heard Emma cry out in alarm, and she reached back blindly, finding her sister's hand and gripping it tightly. "Hold on," Ethan shouted as they reached the bottom of the slope with a bone-jarring impact. He pulled the team hard to the left, following the narrow creek bed that wound between towering pines. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the cutoff, but seemed hesitant to attempt the steep descent in darkness. More shots rang out, but the trees now provided the cover Ethan had hoped for, the bullets thudding harmlessly into wood or whining away into the night. For several heart-stopping minutes, they raced along the creek bed, the wagon threatening to shatter with each violent jolt. Then, gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the rush of water over stones and the labored breathing of the exhausted horses. Ethan finally slowed the team to a more sustainable pace, though he continued to scan the darkness behind them with wary attention. "I think we've lost them for now," he said, his voice rough with tension. "But they'll keep searching. We need to put as much distance between us and them as possible before dawn." Mary nodded, her hands trembling as the immediate danger receded. "Is everyone all right, Emma?" "A bit rattled," her sister replied shakily from the wagon bed, "but unharmed. Those were Prescott's men." "Almost certainly," Ethan confirmed. "He's not a man who accepts defeat easily." "No," Mary agreed, bitterness seeping into her voice. "He considers me his property now, not just a debtor." "He won't give up easily." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Well, he'll have to accept it. You're free now, Mary, both legally and actually." They continued through the night, following the creek until it joined a larger stream, then finding a trail that paralleled the water eastward. The horses were tiring, their pace slowing despite Ethan's encouragement, but the distance between them and their pursuers continued to grow. As the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, they crested a ridge to see a small settlement nestled in the valley below Settler's Fork, their first planned stop on the journey to Denver. "We made it," Mary breathed, exhaustion and relief making her voice tremble. "The first leg," Ethan corrected, though a smile touched his lips for the first time since the shooting began. "But yes, we've cleared the immediate danger." They approached the settlement cautiously, aware that word of their flight might have preceded them. But Settler's Fork appeared peaceful in the early morning light, smoke rising from a few chimneys as its inhabitants began their day. The town was little more than a cluster of buildings serving the needs of miners and travelers passing through the territory, a general store, a smithy, a small church, and a combination hotel and dining establishment grandly named the Pioneer Rest. It was to this last building that Ethan directed the wagon, pulling to a stop in the yard behind the main structure. The proprietor, a weathered woman in her 50s, emerged at the sound of their arrival. "You folks look like you've had a hard night," she observed, taking in their disheveled appearance and the exhausted team. "Room's ready as arranged, and I've got hot coffee and breakfast for those who want it." "Thank you, Mrs. Parker," Ethan replied, helping Mary down from the wagon before turning to assist Emma. "We had some trouble on the trail." Mrs. Parker's shrewd gaze took in Emma's pallor and the obvious signs of their hasty flight. "Prescott's doing, I reckon. Man's got a reputation even out here. You know him?" Mary asked, surprised. "Know of him," the woman corrected. "Idaho Territory ain't so big that word doesn't travel. Come inside, you can tell me all about it once you've rested." The interior of the Pioneer Rest was clean and simply furnished, with a common room dominated by a massive stone fireplace. Mrs. Parker led them to a private dining area off the main room, where a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and freshly baked bread awaited. As they ate, Ethan explained their situation in broad strokes, omitting the more personal aspects of Mary's arrangement with Prescott, but making it clear they were fleeing his influence. Mrs. Parker listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim. "You did right to come here," she said when he had finished. "Prescott's reach doesn't extend much beyond Idaho City, too many other big fish in the territorial ponds. But he's persistent, and he's got money enough to hire men willing to do his bidding." "How far to the next settlement with stage service to Denver?" Mary asked, concern for Emma evident in her voice. Her sister had managed the journey thus far but was clearly exhausted, picking at her food with minimal interest. 3 days' travel to Mineral Springs," Mrs. Parker replied. "They've got regular stage service east, but—" She hesitated, glancing at Emma. "Your sister might find wagon travel that far challenging in her condition." "I'll manage," Emma insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Parker studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but there's no need to rush. You're welcome to stay here until you're stronger. Prescott's men will be looking for a party traveling east, not folks settled in one place." Ethan exchanged glances with Mary, considering the offer. "It might be wise to let the immediate hunt die down," he acknowledged. "Give the horses a chance to rest, too. They've earned it." "Then it's settled," Mrs. Parker declared, rising from the table. "I've got 2 rooms prepared, one for the ladies and one for the gentlemen. Doctor makes his rounds here every Tuesday, so he can check on Miss Emma then. In the meantime, rest is what you all need most." As Mrs. Parker bustled away to attend to other guests, Mary turned to Ethan, concern etched on her features. "Is it safe to stay? Prescott's men were close behind us." "They'll expect us to keep moving," Ethan reasoned. "Settler's Fork is small enough that strangers are noticed. If they come asking questions, we'll have warning." He glanced at Emma, whose eyelids were drooping despite her efforts to remain alert. "Besides, your sister needs proper rest before continuing." Mary nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the truth of his assessment. "What about you? Will you continue to Montana once we're safely on the stage to Denver?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Ethan's gaze held her steadily. "I hadn't decided. My brother's ranch will still be there whenever I arrive." "Oh." Mary looked down, suddenly fascinated by the pattern of her teacup. "Well, we've imposed on your kindness enough. I wouldn't expect you to delay your plans further." "Mary," Ethan said quietly, waiting until she looked up to continue. "Nothing about helping you and Emma has been an imposition, quite the opposite." The intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. Before she could respond, Emma's soft voice interrupted. "If you two are done pretending there's nothing between you, I'd really like to lie down properly. It's been a rather exciting night." Mary flushed scarlet while Ethan cleared his throat, both caught off guard by Emma's perceptiveness despite her exhaustion. "Of course," Mary managed, rising quickly. "Let's get you settled." As they followed Mrs. Parker to their rooms, Mary reflected on the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. They had escaped Prescott's immediate clutches, but the journey ahead remained uncertain. And then, there was Ethan, this man who had upended her life in the most unexpected way, offering freedom when she had resigned herself to captivity. Whatever feelings might be developing between them would have to wait, she decided firmly. First, they needed to ensure their safety and Emma's recovery. Then, perhaps, she could consider the possibility of a future that included more than mere survival. The following days at Settler's Fork settled into an unexpected but welcome routine. Emma, given proper rest and continuing her medication, improved steadily, her color returning and her appetite strengthening. Mary, freed from Prescott's oppressive presence, found herself smiling more easily, her natural resilience reasserting itself as the immediate danger receded. Ethan divided his time between caring for the horses, making arrangements for the next leg of their journey, and watching for any sign of pursuit. On the third day, he rode out with a local hunter, ostensibly to check snare lines but in reality to scout the surrounding area for any indication that Prescott's men had tracked them to the settlement. "No sign of them," he reported upon his return, joining Mary on the hotel's small porch where she sat mending a tear in Emma's shawl. "Seems they've either lost our trail or given up the chase." "Prescott doesn't give up easily," Mary cautioned, though relief was evident in her voice. "But perhaps he's decided we're not worth the effort." Ethan settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs before him. "More likely he's reconsidering his approach. A man like that has other ways of exerting influence." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic movement of Mary's needle punctuating the peaceful sounds of the small settlement going about its business. In the distance, pine-covered mountains rose against a cloudless autumn sky, their peaks already dusted with the season's first snow. "It's beautiful here," Mary observed, setting aside her mending to admire the view. "Reminds me a bit of the valley where we lived before moving to Idaho City." "Why did your family leave?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her to Prescott's Mercantile that fateful day. Mary's expression grew distant with memory. "My father was always chasing the next big strike. When news of gold in the Boys Basin reached our settlement, he couldn't resist the lure of fortune. We sold everything and followed his dream." A sad smile touched her lips. "He never found his bonanza, but he and my mother were happy until the fever took them." "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "Losing parents is never easy, no matter the circumstances." "No," Mary agreed, "but Emma and I managed. We had each other, and that was enough." She glanced at him curiously. "What about your brother? You mentioned he has a ranch in Montana." "James took after our father, practical, forward-thinking. When we lost the Texas ranch, he headed north to make a fresh start. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny, and eventually put down a claim on good grazing land near Helena." Pride tinged Ethan's voice. "He's built something solid there. Has a wife now, too, Sarah. They're expecting their first child in the spring. And he invited you to join them." Ethan nodded. "Been asking for years. I just wasn't ready to settle in one place." He paused, then added more quietly, "Maybe I am now." Mary felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "Mr. Abernathy, Ethan," he corrected gently. "After everything we've been through, I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" "Ethan," she conceded, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for us, more than I can express, but I don't want your sense of." of chivalry or duty to extend beyond helping us reach Denver safely. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What if it's not duty that motivates me anymore, Mary? What if it's something else entirely? The question hung between them, laden with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. Before she could formulate a response, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the road leading into Settler's Fork. A lone rider appeared, his horse moving at a steady trot rather than the urgent gallop of a messenger bearing news. As he drew closer, Mary felt Ethan tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he murmured, rising to his feet. "Get inside if there's trouble." Mary watched anxiously as Ethan descended the porch steps to meet the approaching rider. The stranger pulled his horse to a halt, exchanging words she couldn't hear from her position. After a brief conversation, Ethan's posture relaxed and he gestured for the man to dismount. "Mary," he called, turning toward the porch. "This is Samuel Wilson, Dr. Miller's assistant from Idaho City. He has news for us." Relief replaced apprehension as Mary recognized the young man who often accompanied Dr. Miller on his rounds. "Mr. Wilson, is Emma's doctor all right?" "Quite well, Miss Jameson," Wilson assured her as he approached the porch, removing his hat respectfully. "He sent me to find you with news and some additional medicine for Miss Emma." Inside the Pioneer Rest, gathered around the table in the private dining area, Wilson shared the developments from Idaho City in the days following their departure. Prescott was in a rage when he returned from the failed pursuit, he reported, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Parker. "Threatened all manner of retribution against anyone who'd helped you, but something unexpected happened the following day." "What?" Mary asked, leaning forward intently. "Judge Anderson arrived from Boise, the circuit judge who outranks our local magistrate. Seems someone had sent him copies of several of Prescott's contracts with various women, along with his ledger detailing these arrangements." Wilson's eyes twinkled with barely suppressed satisfaction. The judge was not amused by what he read. Mary gasped, her gaze flying to Ethan. "The ledger? But how? I may have borrowed it briefly while visiting Prescott's mercantile," Ethan admitted, a hint of mischief in his expression. "Made copies of the most damning pages and sent them to Boise with a trustworthy freighter before confronting Prescott about your debt." Emma, who had insisted on joining them for this conversation despite her lingering weakness, let out a delighted laugh. "You planned this all along." "Not just our escape, but Prescott's downfall, too." "I wouldn't go that far," Ethan demurred, though his satisfaction was evident. "I simply ensured that if our confrontation went poorly, there would be consequences for Prescott beyond our immediate situation." "And consequences there have been," Wilson confirmed with relish. "Judge Anderson has suspended Prescott's business license pending a full investigation. Several women have come forward with similar stories to yours, Miss Jameson. The judge is reviewing all of Prescott's outstanding contracts and loans." "What about Sheriff Taylor?" Mary asked, remembering the lawman's complicity in Prescott's schemes. "Suddenly very cooperative with the circuit judge," Wilson reported dryly. Amazing how quickly loyalties shift when federal charges are mentioned. For the first time since fleeing Idaho City, Mary felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to truly unravel. "So we're safe. Prescott can't pursue us anymore." "He's got more pressing concerns now," Wilson confirmed. "Dr. Miller thought you should know as soon as possible, so you could make your plans without looking over your shoulders." He reached into his saddlebag, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. He also sent more of Miss Emma's medication, with instructions for gradual reduction as she continues to improve. Emma accepted the package with heartfelt thanks, while Mary sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of their changed circumstances slowly sinking in. Prescott, who had loomed so large and threatening in her life, was now facing his own reckoning. The justice of it seemed almost too perfect to be real. "There's more," Wilson added, somewhat hesitantly. "Dr. Miller mentioned you might be heading to Denver to stay with family. Well, he asked me to convey that Idaho City would welcome your return, should you wish it. With Prescott's influence waning, there would be opportunities for both of you there." Mary exchanged glances with Emma, surprised by this unexpected alternative. They had been so focused on escape that the possibility of return hadn't entered their considerations. "Thank you for delivering the message," she told Wilson sincerely. "We'll need time to consider our options now that they seem to have expanded." After Wilson had departed, promising to carry their gratitude back to Dr. Miller, the small group remained around the table, absorbing the implications of this new information. "So," Mrs. Parker said pragmatically, "it seems you folks have choices to make. Will you continue to Denver as planned, or return to Idaho City now that the threat has passed?" Emma looked to her sister, clearly willing to follow Mary's lead in this decision. Mary, in turn, found her gaze drawn to Ethan, whose expression revealed nothing of his own thoughts on the matter. "I'm not sure," she admitted finally. "We've been focused solely on escape for so long that I hardly know what to think now that it's no longer necessary." She straightened her shoulders, a hint of her natural determination returning. "But we don't need to decide immediately. Emma still needs time to fully recover before undertaking any long journey." "Wise thinking," Mrs. Parker approved, rising from the table. "Take a few days to consider your path forward. My rooms are at your disposal until you decide." As the others dispersed, Mrs. Parker to her duties, Emma to rest in their shared room, Mary and Ethan found themselves alone once more. The silence between them was charged with unspoken questions, the future suddenly less defined than it had been just hours before. "What will you do now?" Mary finally asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Your original destination was still Montana, wasn't it?" Ethan nodded slowly. "My brother's expecting me, yes, but, Mary prompted when he didn't continue. "But my plans have become complicated." His green eyes held hers steadily. "When I stopped in Idaho City, I had no intention of staying more than a night or two. I certainly didn't expect to meet someone who would make me reconsider my entire future." Mary's heart quickened at his words. "Ethan, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "You've just learned you have options you didn't know existed yesterday. Take time to consider what you and Emma truly want." He rose from the table, his expression softening. "Just know that whatever you decide, I'd like to be part of that future if you'll have me." With that declaration hanging in the air between them, he excused himself, leaving Mary alone with her swirling thoughts and the unfamiliar sensation of hope blooming in her chest. The days that followed were a time of healing and decision-making for both Jameson sisters. Emma continued to improve rapidly, her natural vitality returning as the medication did its work. Mary, freed from the immediate fear of Prescott's pursuit, found herself contemplating possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just weeks earlier. They discussed their options extensively, returning to Idaho City, now that Prescott's influence was waning, continuing to Denver as planned to stay with their aunt, or perhaps exploring some entirely new path. Each choice had its merits and challenges, complicated further by Mary's growing feelings for Ethan and the uncertainty of his place in their future. On the evening of their 6th day in Settler's Fork, Mary sought out Ethan after dinner, finding him on the small porch where they had shared many conversations since their arrival. The autumn night was crisp, stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky, a peacefulness that seemed worlds away from their desperate flight from Idaho City. "May I join you?" Mary asked, a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Ethan rose immediately, offering her the more comfortable of the two chairs. "Of course. How's Emma tonight?" "Better every day," Mary replied, settling into the offered seat. "Dr. Parker says she's responding remarkably well to the treatment. Another week of rest, and she should be strong enough for whatever journey we decide upon." "Have you made a decision, then?" Ethan's tone was carefully neutral, though his gaze was intent. Mary nodded, her hands fidgeting slightly with the edge of her shawl. "We have. We're going to continue to Denver, at least initially. Emma needs time to fully recover, and our aunt has been asking us to visit for years." She paused, gathering her courage before continuing. "After that, well, it depends partly on you." "On me," Ethan repeated, surprise evident in his voice. "When we first met, you said you were headed to your brother's ranch in Montana," Mary reminded him. "Is that still your intention?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It is, though my timeline has become considerably more flexible than it once was." "Emma and I were thinking," Mary continued, her voice gaining confidence, "that perhaps after spending some time with our aunt, Montana might be a fine place to make a fresh start, if we'd be welcome there." Ethan's smile broadened, hope dawning in his eyes. "I believe you'd be very welcome indeed. My brother has written often about the need for a school teacher in the growing settlement near his ranch. Emma's education would make her well suited for such a position, once her health is fully restored." "And me?" Mary asked softly, her heart pounding as she voiced the question that had occupied her thoughts for days. "What place would there be for me in Montana?" Ethan rose from his chair, moving to kneel before her, his eyes level with hers in the starlight. "Any place you wish, Mary Jameson. Teacher, shopkeeper, seamstress, the settlement needs all these skills and more." He took her hands gently in his. "But what I've come to hope very much is that you might consider a place by my side." Mary's breath caught at the naked emotion in his expression. "We've known each other such a short time," she whispered, though her fingers tightened around his. "True," Ethan acknowledged, "and I'm not asking for promises or commitments now. Only that you'd allow me to court you properly once we reach Montana, to build something together, step by step, as we come to know each other fully." The sincerity in his voice melted the last of Mary's reservations. This was not Prescott's coercive manipulation or a stranger's fleeting interest. This was something deeper, a connection forged in crisis but extending beyond it, offering not just safety but partnership. "I think I would like that very much," she admitted, a smile blooming on her face that matched his own. Ethan's expression illuminated with joy, and with gentle reverence, he leaned forward to place a kiss on her forehead, a promise of respect and devotion that moved Mary far more than any passionate embrace could have. "Then it's settled," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "Denver first, to see your aunt and ensure Emma's recovery is complete. Then Montana, where we'll write the next chapter together." Spring had transformed the Montana landscape by the time the stagecoach carrying Mary and Emma Jameson rolled into the settlement of New Hope. The winter snow had retreated to linger only on the highest peaks, replaced by vibrant green meadows dotted with wildflowers. The small town, little more than a cluster of buildings serving the surrounding ranches, bustled with activity as the long isolation of winter gave way to the connectivity of passable roads. Standing tall among the small crowd gathered to meet the stage was Ethan Abernathy, his familiar figure immediately drawing Mary's gaze as she descended from the coach. In the 5 months since they had parted in Denver, he continuing to Montana, while the sisters stayed with their aunt for Emma's complete recovery. Mary had often pictured this reunion, wondering if the connection they had formed would withstand the test of separation. The answer was evident in the warmth that flooded her heart as their eyes met across the dusty street. Ethan strode forward, removing his hat as he approached, his smile as bright as the Montana sunshine. "Miss Jameson," he greeted formally, though his eyes conveyed far more intimate emotions. "Welcome to New Hope." "Mr. Abernathy," Mary replied with equal formality, though her own smile threatened to break through her composed facade. "It's good to see you again." Behind her, Emma descended from the stage with the assistance of the driver, her health now fully restored after months of proper treatment and rest. "Don't mind me," she teased, observing the charged silence between her sister and Ethan. "I'm perfectly capable of introducing myself to everyone while you two stare at each other." Mary flushed, breaking the spell, while Ethan laughed and turned to greet Emma with genuine pleasure. "Miss Emma, you're looking remarkably well. How was your journey?" "Long," Emma replied honestly, "but worth every jolting mile to see this country. It's even more beautiful than you described in your letters." Ethan beamed with pride, clearly pleased by her approval. "Wait until you see the valley where James's ranch is located. But first, let me introduce you both to some of New Hope's citizens. They've been eagerly awaiting your arrival since I mentioned a qualified teacher might be joining us." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of introductions and welcoming conversations. The settlement's residents, hungry for new faces and connections to the wider world, embraced the Jameson sisters with open hospitality. Emma, with her natural charm and evident education, was immediately sought after by parents eager to secure proper schooling for their children. Mary, whose practical skills had sustained her and Emma through difficult times, found herself similarly welcome among the women of New Hope. By late afternoon, they reached the Abernathy Ranch, a prosperous spread nestled in a verdant valley with mountains rising majestically on three sides. The main house, constructed of solid logs with a welcoming porch wrapping around two sides, stood as testament to James Abernathy's success since leaving Texas years earlier. James himself, a slightly older version of Ethan with the same green eyes but a more weathered countenance, greeted them at the gate alongside his wife Sarah, whose advanced pregnancy did nothing to diminish her graceful welcome. "At last we meet the famous Jameson sisters," James declared, helping Emma down from the wagon Ethan had borrowed to transport them from town. "My brother's letters have spoken of little else since autumn." Mary glanced at Ethan, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hope he didn't exaggerate our virtues," she said diplomatically. "If anything, he understated them," Sarah interjected warmly, embracing Mary as though they were already family. "Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted from your journey, and I've prepared rooms where you can rest before dinner." The interior of the Abernathy home reflected the same thoughtful craftsmanship as its exterior simple but beautifully made furniture, colorful quilts, and touches of feminine refinement that transformed what might have been a bachelor's functional dwelling into a true home. "It's lovely," Mary breathed, genuinely impressed. "James built most of it himself," Sarah said proudly. "Though I contributed the curtains and quilts, we've prepared the guest room for Emma and Mary." She hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. "We thought you might like the small cabin just beyond the garden. It was James's first home here before we married and built this house. Ethan's been fixing it up these past months." Mary turned to Ethan in surprise. "You have?" "I thought you might appreciate a place of your own," he explained, his expression slightly anxious. It's not large, but it's comfortable and only a short walk from the main house. Of course, if you'd prefer to stay here with Emma, no, Mary interrupted, touched by his consideration. That sounds perfect. May I see it? While Emma settled into her room in the main house, Ethan led Mary along a well-tended path through a kitchen garden bursting with early vegetables. Beyond a row of apple trees in fresh bloom stood a small cabin, recently refurbished with a new roof, freshly chinked walls, and a small porch adorned with a swing wide enough for two. "It's not much compared to your aunt's home in Denver," Ethan said as they approached, suddenly seeming uncertain. "But I thought, it's beautiful," Mary assured him, her heart swelling with emotion as she realized the effort he had put into creating this space for her. After years of depending on others' charity or working under others' control, the idea of a place truly her own, even temporarily, was overwhelming. Inside, the cabin was simple but thoughtfully appointed: a small sitting area with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen area with shelves stocked with basic provisions, and a bedroom just large enough for a beautifully crafted bed, covered in a quilt that matched those in the main house. "Sarah helped with the furnishings," Ethan explained as Mary explored the space. "She said every woman needs her own domain, however modest." Mary turned to face him, suddenly aware they were truly alone for the first time since her arrival. During their correspondence over the winter months, their feelings had deepened through the exchange of thoughts and experiences, but the physical distance had maintained a certain formality between them. Now, standing in the home he had prepared for her, that distance evaporated like morning mist under the Montana sun. "Thank you," she said softly, moving closer to him. "Not just for this, but for everything. For helping us escape Prescott, for giving us the chance at a new life, for loving you," Ethan finished when she faltered, his voice low and earnest. "That's been the easiest part of all, Mary Jameson." His admission, so simply stated yet profound in its implications, broke through the last of Mary's carefully maintained reserves. She closed the distance between them, her hands rising to rest lightly on his chest. "I've thought of you every day since Denver," she confessed. "Wondered if what I felt was real or just gratitude for your help." "And?" Ethan asked, his hands coming to rest gently on her waist. "And I've concluded," Mary said, meeting his gaze directly, "that while I will always be grateful for your intervention in our lives, what I feel for you now has nothing to do with debt or obligation. It's something far simpler and far more profound." "I'm glad to hear it," Ethan murmured, his smile illuminating his entire face, "because I've been planning to ask you an important question since the moment your stage arrived today." Mary's heart skipped a beat. "Have you now?" "Mary Jameson," Ethan began formally, though his eyes danced with joy. "I know we agreed to court properly once you arrived in Montana, to take time to build our relationship on solid ground. But these past months of letters have only confirmed what I already knew in Idaho City, that you are the woman I want to share my life with." He released her waist to take her hands in his touch gentle yet sure. "I'm not a wealthy man, though I have a stake in this ranch and prospects to build something of our own in time. I can't offer you luxury, but I can promise you respect, partnership, and a love that will only grow stronger with the years." His voice deepened with emotion. "Will you marry me, Mary? Will you make a home with me here in Montana?" Tears of happiness filled Mary's eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her capacity. When she found her voice again, it was steady with certainty. "Yes, Ethan Abernathy. Yes, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he drew her closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate, respectful yet claiming. Mary responded with equal fervor, the last vestiges of her past falling away as she embraced this new beginning. Later, as twilight settled over the Montana Valley, and they walked hand in hand back to the main house where Emma and the others awaited, Mary reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun in desperation, trading her freedom for her sister's medicine, had transformed through courage, friendship, and love into a liberty more profound than any she had known before. Beside her, Ethan squeezed her hand as if reading her thoughts. "Happy?" he asked simply. Mary smiled up at the man who had paid her debt and set her free, only to win her heart in the process. "More than I ever believed possible." The October sky was brilliant blue over the small church in New Hope as Mary Jameson became Mary Abernathy, in a ceremony attended by the entire settlement. Emma, radiant in her role as maid of honor, stood proudly beside her sister, her health now so completely restored that no one meeting her would guess she had ever battled consumption. James served as his brother's best man, his infant son sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms in the front pew. The community that had welcomed the Jameson sisters so warmly 6 months earlier celebrated the union with genuine joy, recognizing in Mary and Ethan's story the same pioneer spirit that had brought all of them to this remote but beautiful corner of Montana territory. As they exchanged vows, promises of love, respect, and partnership for all the days to come, Mary thought briefly of how far they had traveled from that desperate moment in Prescott's Mercantile. The man who had once seemed to hold her fate in his grasping hands was now facing federal charges for his predatory practices, his empire crumbling under the weight of multiple testimonies against him. But such thoughts were fleeting, overshadowed by the joy of the present moment and the promise of the future unfolding before them. As Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, crafted by the town's blacksmith from a nugget found in the nearby creek, Mary knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just freedom, but her true home. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple before him. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Abernathy." Ethan needed no further encouragement, drawing Mary into a kiss that sealed their union while their friends and neighbors applauded their happiness. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Mary caught Emma's eye and saw in her sister's expression a matching contentment. Emma had found her own place in New Hope as the settlement's first formal teacher, her natural gifts flourishing in the small schoolhouse the community had built especially for her. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing on the open ground beside the church. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Mary and Ethan moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who had become dear friends in the relatively short time since their arrival. "Are you ready to depart?" Ethan asked as the night deepened, his voice soft against her ear. They had planned a brief honeymoon 3 days at a hunting cabin owned by a friend of James's, nestled beside an alpine lake in the nearby mountains. Mary nodded, a pleasant anticipation warming her at the prospect of truly being alone with her new husband. They had maintained a respectful distance throughout their courtship, but the desire simmering between them had grown steadily more difficult to contain as their wedding day approached. After fond farewells to Emma and the Abernathys, they slipped away from the celebration to where their horses waited, saddled and ready for the journey. The ride to the cabin took less than 2 hours, a magical journey under a canopy of stars with the first chill of autumn crispness in the air. The cabin, when they reached it, was rustic but welcoming, with firewood stacked beside the stone hearth and provisions left by James earlier in the week. Ethan lit the fire and lanterns while Mary explored the single-room structure, her initial nervousness giving way to a deeper emotion as the reality of their union settled around her like a cherished blanket. When Ethan turned from stoking the fire to find her watching him, the look that passed between them needed no words. He crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with reverent tenderness. "Mrs. Abernathy," he murmured, the simple use of her new name sending a shiver of pleasure down her spine. "I still can't quite believe you're really my wife." "Believe it," Mary whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "I'm yours, Ethan, now and always." The kiss that followed transcended all that had come before, deepening into an expression of desire too long restrained. With gentle hands and whispered endearments, they discovered each other anew, their union becoming complete in the most ancient and sacred of ways. Later, cradled in Ethan's arms before the glowing embers of the fire, Mary reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From the desperate young woman who had traded her freedom for her sister's medicine to the confident, beloved wife she had become, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking about fate," Mary replied, nestling closer against his warmth. "How the darkest moments sometimes lead to the greatest joys. If Emma hadn't fallen ill, if Prescott hadn't been so cruel, if you hadn't stopped in Idaho City that particular day, we still would have found each other," Ethan asserted with quiet conviction. "Perhaps not in the same way or at the same time, but souls meant to be together always find their path." Mary smiled at his unexpected romanticism. "Is that what we are, souls meant to be together?" "Without doubt," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "From the moment I saw you leaving Prescott's Mercantile that first day, something in me recognized something in you. I just didn't have the words for it then." "And now," she prompted, lifting her face to his. "Now I have the only word that matters," Ethan replied, his green eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. "Love." As their lips met once more, Mary surrendered to the perfect rightness of their union, grateful beyond measure for the twisted path that had led her from captivity to this profound freedom found in loving and being loved. 5 years later, Mary Abernathy stood on the porch of the home she and Ethan had built on their own parcel of land, a thriving ranch nestled in a valley, adjacent to James and Sarah's property. The house, larger and more refined than the cabin where she had first stayed, reflected their growing prosperity and the needs of their expanding family. Inside, their 4-year-old son Daniel was being entertained by his Aunt Emma, who had come for her weekly Sunday dinner, a tradition maintained despite Emma's recent engagement to New Hope's young doctor. Their 1-year-old daughter Rose napped peacefully in the cradle Ethan had crafted for her birth, her cherubic features peaceful in sleep. In the distance, Mary could see Ethan and James riding toward the house, returning from checking the southern pastures where their combined herds grazed. The Abernathy brothers' partnership had flourished over the years, their ranching operation now one of the most successful in the county. The settlement of New Hope had grown alongside their prosperity, evolving from a scattered collection of buildings to a proper town with a church, school, doctor's office, and several thriving businesses. As she watched her husband dismount and hand his horse to the ranch hand who approached, Mary reflected on how completely her life had transformed since that desperate day in Idaho City. The woman who had traded her freedom for her sister's medicine could never have imagined the abundance that would eventually be hers, not just material comfort, but the deeper riches of family, community, and purpose. Ethan looked up, catching sight of her on the porch, and his face broke into the smile that still made her heart race after all their years together. He said something to his brother, then strode toward the house with the eager step of a man returning to his heart's home. "Beautiful as ever," he greeted her, mounting the porch steps to draw her into his embrace. "How are our little ones?" Daniel is regaling Emma with tales of his imaginary adventures, and Rose is sleeping like an angel, Mary reported, leaning into his familiar warmth. "How was the ride?" "Productive. The southern pasture is holding up well despite the dry summer." He brushed a strand of copper hair from her face, his touch as tender as in their earliest days together. "I've been thinking about something on the ride back." "Oh." Mary looked up, recognizing the thoughtful expression that meant her husband had been turning over an idea for some time. "I received a letter yesterday from Dr. Miller in Idaho City," Ethan began, guiding her to the porch swing where they often sat in the evenings after the children were asleep. "Prescott's being released from prison next month." Mary tensed slightly at the name she had worked hard to forget over the years. "I see." "Don't worry," Ethan assured her, noting her reaction. "He's no threat to us here. By all accounts, he's a broken man, no friends, no business, no influence." Dr. Miller mentioned he'll likely leave the territory entirely. "Then why mention him at all?" Mary asked, curious despite her discomfort. Ethan's expression softened as he took her hands in his. "Because I realized something when I read the letter. In a strange way, we owe our happiness to him. If not for his cruelty and your courage in the face of it, we might never have found each other." Mary considered this perspective, finding an unexpected peace in acknowledging the truth of it. "I suppose even the darkest chapters of our lives can lead to light, given time." "Exactly," Ethan agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "And I thought perhaps we might mark the occasion by establishing something positive in New Hope, a fund for families facing medical emergencies, so no one else ever has to make the choice you did." Tears sprang to Mary's eyes at the beautiful symmetry of his suggestion. "Ethan Abernathy, just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more." His smile was tender as he brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Is that a yes?" "It's a most definite yes," Mary confirmed, leaning in to seal the agreement with a kiss that held all the depth of their years together and the promise of many more to come. From inside the house came the patter of small feet and Daniel's excited voice calling for his father. Ethan rose, drawing Mary to her feet beside him as their son burst onto the porch, followed by a laughing Emma. "Papa, Aunt Emma says you promised to show me how to ride Thunder today," the boy exclaimed, referring to the gentle pony Ethan had acquired for his son's eventual riding lessons. "Did I now?" Ethan replied, swinging the boy up into his arms with practiced ease. "Well, if Aunt Emma says so, it must be true. What does Mama think about this plan?" All eyes turned to Mary, who pretended to consider the matter seriously before breaking into a smile. "I think a boy's first riding lesson is a special occasion that calls for all of us to participate. Let me check on Rose, and we'll make an afternoon of it." As they moved inside together, Ethan carrying Daniel, Emma linking her arm through Mary's, the last whisper of old fears evaporated in the warmth of their family circle. Mary Jameson Abernathy, once a woman who had traded her freedom for her sister's medicine, had found a liberty and love beyond anything she could have imagined in the arms of the cowboy who had paid her debt and set her free. In the years that followed, the Abernathy Family Fund helped countless families in New Hope and surrounding settlements weather medical emergencies without falling prey to exploitation. It stood as testament to the truth Mary and Ethan had discovered in their own journey. That sometimes the darkest moments in life could, with courage and love, become the foundation for the greatest blessings.